Now, the title of this video is going to be Mastering Classroom Dynamics for Better Behavior Management. I thought about that one a lot. So
Okay,
that's going to be our title. Now,
let's
in
do
this
it.
video, we're going to dive into all things classroom management, student behavior, and more importantly, what we can do as teachers to create the classroom we always wanted. And the best part, of course, is I'm joined by you, Dr. Wooley. So tell me if I got this wrong. You're a retired teacher, an speaker, and what, maybe an expert on classroom dynamics. I would even say that. So, hey, welcome, Dr. Wooley. I'm going to start with this. I learned this terminology, lore. So,
Uh-huh.
what is the lore? Be your story. What is your story? Who are
Sure.
you? Where you're from, and what's going on now?
No problem. First of all, I thank you so much for the opportunity to have this conversation and to join you on this platform. I I like to just make sure that I honor and recognize people because you have to be careful of who you invite on your platform because it says a lot about you and the messages that you are putting out into the world. So to have me come and share my message, it says a lot about you, and I appreciate that first
My
and
pleasure.
foremost. Secondly, who is Shaun Woodley? Well, from an educator standpoint, I got into the classroom in a sort of backwards, haphazard kind of way. I did not grow up wanting to be a teacher. I was not one of those people who set up the toys and the GI Joes and was like, I'm the that wasn't me. I was a musician and I was an artist. I'm very creative by nature, and so being a musician in all aspects. I mean, growing up playing drums, like percussion up and down, and then expanding to learn, melodic instruments, like that was where I got to create. And coming out of senior year in high school, I just knew that I was going to college to be a professional musician, and then I was going to get picked up to go on tour. That's what I thought. That did not happen, nowhere near. And thankfully, in some of my music classes, when it came time for conversations with, about future plans, I had a really awesome music teacher, God rest his soul, and he told me, he said, he said, you're a great musician. And I was a good musician. I wasn't great, but he hyped me up a little bit. And he said, but just in case you don't get, you know, ripped out of the music classroom to go on a world tour, just in case you don't have a backup plan. He said, instead of studying just music, why don't you study music and education? I said, how bad could it be? It was the best decision I made. And so going into college, I went to HBCU, Hampton University, and I majored in, it was a 5-year program. So I came out with a teaching license, studying education and studying music. And while there, I think around end of sophomore year, junior year, starting getting into my education courses. And I was like, wow, this is actually like kind of fascinating to me. And at that time, that was where my interest in learning human behavior, social, all of those, the dynamics of interacting with other humans and what makes people do what they do, my interest spawned then. And so getting into the classroom, doing some student teaching, it was a great experience for me. It wasn't perfect, but it was a good experience. And subsequently finishing the 5-year program and going into the classroom to teach. Going into the classroom now was different for me because I had a lot of difficulty starting, but not a lot of difficulty in the sense that others have. I know the story for a lot of other teachers when they start is behavior management or even just adjusting to being the leader of a learning environment can be a lot to take in at one time. And it was, but for me, I was teaching at one of those schools like on the other side of the tracks, like, those kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I was fed everything like, don't smile till November.
Mm-hmm.
These kids, they do this, they do that. Like, make sure that you go in there and you let them know who's boss. And I did exactly that. I was teaching at the middle school level. And so when I got into that classroom, I went and laid the smack down, like educationally, such that I taught with fear. And at the time, I thought that I was doing a good job. And I even got reinforced by some of my peers, neighboring teachers. Wow, you're so good at classroom management, because when you would walk by my classroom, it was quiet in there. Hindsight being 2020 and knowing what I know now, you can't learn when your brain is worried about protecting itself.
Mhm. Okay.
So while I was using fear as a teaching mechanism, my students were not learning the way that they should have been. And I was also stepping outside of my natural, like it's not in my character to be that type of person,
Mm.
but I thought that's who I needed to be for quote unquote those kids. And what got me out of that, I'm sitting well into my teaching career. I'm sitting in my office after school one day, and sixth grader, well, her parent calls me and she basically says to me that, my daughter is scared in your classroom. Mind you, if you could picture the sweetest little sixth grade girl, like the perfect student, one that smiles and is an absolute pleasant student. And if you could replicate that person, you like, this was her. Did not cause me any problems at all, but she was scared in my classroom. And that was a wake up call for me, because that's not the type of person that I wanted to be. That's not how I wanted to run my classroom. And more importantly, if I'm being honest, I taught in a school where the majority of my students looked like me. And so here I am trying to, I'm not doing what it is that I'm not doing right by those students by using fear. And I needed to figure out something else. And so that started me on the journey to lead me to where I am now.
So how long were you in your teaching career when you kind of made that shift?
That was year 2 for me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So well, still early on then. Still early on,
Yeah.
you came to realize, okay,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
that's quite impressive. Every time I tell my story, it took me about 7 years to finally feel comfortable being
Mm-hmm.
a teacher. And for those,
Oh,
and
well, make no mistake about it. I did not like flip the switch and all problems were solved, but that was a turning point, I will say.
it was right then and there when you kind of realized that. I follow another gentleman. I'll throw his name out. It's called Real Rap with Reynolds, and
CJ,
yeah,
that's
it's
my
easy.
guy right there.
Oh
Yep.
man, I real fast start a story here. I remember when I first started my YouTube channel. It's amazing how one person, a stranger by all means, can make a difference in your life. I remember I was like, following his stuff and everything else, and I said, "Hey, Reynolds, I'm thinking about starting this YouTube channel. I just want to know if I get your take on it, everything else." Now, of course, if people see YouTube, they think this person's has it all figured out. You look at him like an idol, right? And so I sent it to him, and I think about a day or two later, he emails me back, like I get all excited, I showed the wife and everything. Look here, and he said, "Hey," and this is just saying that your ordinary, is somebody else's extraordinary. And I said, "Oh, I'm locked in now." It's amazing. Just that
Yes.
one comment has
Yep.
carried me 5 years to do this.
Wow.
But
Wow.
all that to say, one other thing he says, and I think he got it from somebody else. Um, and I'm trying to make this shift. I call myself the classroom management guy, right? Classroom
Mm-hmm.
management. But he says there's comes a point in time where it's not about classroom management, it's classroom leadership.
Mm.
And it
Mm-hmm.
sounds
Mm-hmm.
like early on in your career, you made that change.
Mm-hmm.
How would you define the difference between classroom management and classroom leadership?
You know, there there's a lot of overlap and intersection between the two concepts. They are different. When I think classroom management, I think more structure. I think more systems. I think more organization. When I think leadership, I think influence. But there are intersectionalities between the sub concepts of both of those concepts, if that makes any sense. Give you an example. Although classroom management a lot of times is your rules, your routines, your expectations and procedures, that is carried, it has to be carried out in a specific way. And that is demonstrated through your leadership. It's also demonstrated through your instructional design. Leadership in the learning environment, to me, is about how you can relate to someone and be empathetic. You don't have to be sympathetic. You don't have to agree with what they're doing, but it is important to understand it. And using that as a springboard for how you interact, knowing that you cannot treat everybody the same, because when you treat everybody, like you have to meet everyone where they are, and that's a cliche statement, kind of sort of, but it's so true. I think about it now. I'm a parent. I wasn't a parent when I first started teaching, but I am now. I have two kids. I have a 10-year-old son and a 7-year-old daughter, and they are absolute night and day. When I tell you, for anybody that has more than one, I'm willing to, like, most of the people that I know that have more than one kid, it's something I don't know where this comes from, but I thought my son came out, he was generally speaking relatively easy. And we were like, me and my wife, like, let's go. Round two, let's go. No, it was not the same. And my daughter she has main character energy. And when I say that she is the polar opposite of her brother, but she's her own person. So in other words, from a parenting perspective, I can't treat them the same. I cannot, they need different things from me, and learning their personalities, learning they grew up in the same home, they grew up from the same parents, but they need different things. And the more I get into this research of understanding how you influence someone and the science behind that, I'm understanding that they both need the same thing. They just need it through different channels. And, we can go further through that if you need to, but it's, it's been a learning experience for me. And a lot of this, I'm trying to help other educators learn, because in the classroom, we see this a lot, but a lot of it we're not taught. We're not taught a lot about the functions of, like, why people do what it is that they do. We know that classroom management is important, but it's only taught at a surface level when you're learning to become a teacher, if you even have classroom management. There's so much to that.
Yeah. I try to figure that out because one of my heartbreaks is
Hmm.
because I've been doing this, I swear, forever now, 20 something years. And one of my heartbreaks is seeing new teachers
Hmm.
not get rehired. And inevitably, the reason, more often, we'll call it classroom management, classroom leadership, classroom
Yeah.
management. That's the reason, unless something else horrible happens. But those are far and few between. And I always think to myself, and I remember I worked with a couple of them, and I think and we would go observe other classrooms, and you
Hmm.
walk into classrooms, and they just have, there's some teachers just to, this is the hard part I'm trying to find out. They have it. They
Hmm.
have it, whatever that
It.
it is, that
Hmm.
management, that leadership, that persona, I do not know exactly what it is. And I've been trying to rack my brain for 5 years to define what it is
Yeah.
and how to teach it to other teachers. And I haven't come up with the answer yet. I mean, I got clues, I got different ideas, routines, procedures, and everything else, but I can't quantify it exactly what it is.
Yep.
Do you have an answer for what it is?
Sort of. And
Okay.
it's
I'm glad you didn't say yes, because I've been a little disheartened to that one. But go ahead.
I'm going to approach the answer through a different lens, and then bring it back around to it. So what my research has kind of exposed me to, here's how I position what it is that I do. In this role now, working with teachers, whether it's workshops, consulting, whatever it is, in a capacity that I can serve, I help them to understand behavior management, the intersection of behavior management slash classroom management and behavior science. And there are fundamental drivers of human behavior. Perfect example. I did a masterclass a couple of weeks ago. I think it was the last time I did the last one. And I start by asking a couple of questions to kind of get people's curiosity piqued a little bit. And one of the true false questions that I ask, and I ask them to put their response in the chat, is the prompt on the screen is, there are universal drivers of human behavior, true or false. There's always a little pause, and then the chat starts to fire off. And it's usually about 50-50, true, false, true, 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 false, false, false. And when I put the answer up there that
Wait,
it
wait,
is
wait.
true,
Okay, that's my answer. True, by the way. Am I right?
mhm, there are universal drivers of human behavior. If you think about it from a historical perspective, our species has survived for a very, very, very long time. And it was not an accident. There are specific drivers that have helped us to survive. And so what I do is I help to take what has helped me to understand it. And what I try to help teachers do is understand that and how that makes its way into the classroom. So let me give you an example. When I talk about drivers of survival, I'm talking about basically like the need that we all have to belong, the need that we all have to demonstrate mastery, autonomy, meaning, and of course, safety. And that safety is physical as well as psychological safety. If you think about it, those five drives have helped our species. And every day we get up with the push to meet those five different things. How can I learn something? And if you think about it, our species, we had to learn something. We had to learn to make tools. We had to learn to take care of our family. We had to learn to read cultural signals and cues to know where you matter, where you're important. You had to learn to see what was a threat, what wasn't. If you didn't, you would not survive. Belonging helped because we survive. We are a herd people. We are social animals. That is why when someone like rejects you, whether it's a love interest or socially, like that triggers the same parts of the threat detection and pain response in the brain as like physical pain. We've, for so long we had to understand meaning, and not meaning in the sense of purpose like in destiny. Yes, that's important, but meaning more so in the purpose of pattern recognition. Understanding patterns and pattern recognition helped our species survive, because one of the key things that a lot of people would just really, if you think about it, it makes perfect sense, but it doesn't really get the respect that it needs. A long time ago, one of the things that helped that generation, if you will, of humans survive the longest was learning and understanding and recognizing weather patterns,
Mhm.
because there were certain times of the year. And if you think, it makes perfect sense
Mhm.
now. You have winter, spring, summer, fall. We don't even think about it. We know instinctively that there are certain things you can grow in the spring and the summer, and there's certain things you
Mhm.
cannot in the fall and winter. We know that now. People did that. Wasn't just something inherent. You had to learn that, and you had to understand that pattern. So all of those things have helped our species to survive, and all of those things are driving everything that we do every single day. And so, with that understanding of us getting out of the bed and being pushed to meet those specific needs, and they're expressed in a lot of different ways, and that's when the nuance and everything
Mhm.
happens. I I try to take that understanding and bring it and transform it, or translate it rather, into instruction and classroom management. So to go back to your original question about the people that have it. The
Mhm.
people that have it are the ones who can help the students in their learning environment meet or feel that they're meeting those five the best and on a more consistent basis. And more times than not, especially in the learning environment, it has to do with that need to belong socially and feel like you are a part of something, and the need to meet your internal drive for like mastery, your internal drive to learn something and to fuel. Like that's how your brain engages, and is when we meet that need. Like those are kind of the two most common, even autonomy and safety a little bit too, but definitely belonging and mastery.
But belonging. So I'm thinking about that because as you're talking, I couldn't help but think my own classroom, right? How am I
Hmm.
applying this in my own classroom? And once again, trying to figure out what I'm doing or not doing
Yep.
well or
Yep.
not well. And so I'm trying to think. So the two, belonging,
Yep.
and of course, master. Master, I assume would be, is it with the academics specifically, or just social? Or what do you say, mastery in
Learning.
learning? Okay,
In other
mastery
words,
learning.
like the inherent drive to learn.
Okay.
Hmm.
And then belonging is a huge one. I definitely see that
Hmm.
in the classroom.
Yep.
Safety, you said, was another one.
Correct. And that's
I'm
psychological and physical safety.
psychological. I remember when I was early on, someone came, I forgot who it was, but they were talking about, well, I don't even know if we still use this framework, Maslow's hierarchy, right? That's probably all outdated now, I'm guessing, but I
Not
remember
really.
it's still,
People still use it, but it's not the same thing. And I'll explain in a second. But go
okay.
ahead.
But I remember they were talking, I said, you got to understand that some of these students, they don't even have a safe home environment, not enough food, shelter's
Yeah.
not there. And so they
Yeah.
come to school. And so we expect them to be enthusiastic about learning when they're worried about what's going to happen when they go home tonight. And that's like, that rang a bell. Like, I can see that now,
Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
that's always in the back of my mind of that. Um, but you were saying Maslow hierarchy is not quite the same as you're talking about, or what are some
Mhm.
similarities? Or what I really want to dive into, how does this actually play out in the classroom?
Sure.
Because um, I could see the philosophical or the idea behind it, the research behind it, but in the trenches, how does it actually apply to in the
Sure.
trenches?
Great question. So I'll frame it like this. Those five survival drives, if you will. Number one, they're baked into the core of pretty much everything that we do, as I mentioned. What's important is that those are drivers of what we do, but we meet those needs in very, very different ways. And so the brain has developed over a long period of time, basically these cognitive mechanisms that we have as a way to filter information. In other words, and this is, most people are familiar with some of these threat detection systems. Okay. Right now, if you're sitting somewhere and you hear a loud bang out your window, like instantly, let me even preface it by saying this. There was some research that I read early 90s, and then there was a book that was written afterwards, Daniel Kahneman. Basically, he wrote the book, him and the other author, I can't think of his name in the moment, but Daniel Kahneman gets credited with most of this. He won the Nobel Prize for his research in the early 90s. And to surmise it, it basically says that 2% of our thinking is logical, like where you focus, where you systematically organize things, where you put energy, like cognitively, to put order and structure to something. The other 98% are automatic functions of the brain, like instantaneous and automatic. So going back to the previous example that I gave, if you're sitting there right now, out of your window, you hear a bang, automatically your heart rate goes up, your attention is now diverted because there's a threat of safety. So those threat detection systems, like that's automatic. You don't have to say, oh, wow, I think that something might be wrong. Let me actively put energy in. You don't have to do that. It's an automatic response. That there are dozens of those types of automatic responses. Reward systems is another. When a lot of people are familiar with like dopamine, but dopamine often gets thought of in the sense of motivation. So, and the carrot and stick. Hey,
Mhm.
you do this and you'll get this reward. You do this and you'll get that reward. I use it with my kids all the time. I'm not going to lie. Eat these vegetables, then you get ice cream. We do it every day. We overdo it in the classroom to the point where it loses its power and we lose that intrinsic motivating factor. So when we talk about this idea of motivation and dopamine, dopamine is not just released when you experience something that is pleasurable, it's also released when you're anticipating something that is pleasurable. And so that is another one of those like automatic responses. Social context, when we are engaging in something social because that need to belong is a driving force. What I mentioned before, a lot of social things, they do several things. They help us to understand our place in society from a belonging standpoint. We get feedback from it, which triggers the reward systems. It's very dynamic. There's a lot happening at the same time, all with the intent to meet those needs. So, what does that mean in learning environment? One of the things that we have to understand about the way the learning environment is designed, especially in the US, it's a lot of times very compliance focused and it's a lot of times very isolating, meaning that when you come into that classroom, especially think about people like, you and I, when we were in the classroom, those straight rows,
Mm.
you test by yourself, you sit by yourself. It wasn't, and especially the older you get, the less you do with other people. Kindergarten, first grade, third grade, you had a carpet time and you were doing those groups. But the older we got, the more isolated we got. And you that green Scantron sheet, you're doing
Mm.
everything by yourself. It's inherently built into the fabric of our instructional and educational institutions. But that need for us to be social does not go anywhere. As a matter of fact, it gets even stronger because it feels, not that it's intentional, but it feels like it's being suppressed. And so when you combine that with the modern student, someone who is not used to sitting in discomfort, and that's, I think, one of the biggest changes between education now versus what it may have been even 15 years ago. Social media has warped the perception of what it means to engage someone and what it means to capture their attention, because students don't have to experience boredom for long ever.
Mm.
There's a tablet always right there,
Mm-hmm.
something that you can engage with, something that your brain can experience novelty with, because you can swipe away boredom just like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
they don't have to be bored. And so when they are under engaged in the classroom, they're so much easily triggered. It's easier to trigger those adverse responses because they have not had to sit in those uncomfortable positions for long. But
Okay.
there's a lot to that.
Ooh, okay. So let me think. So let me break some of this down here because
Mm-hmm.
so you ended with talking about the engagement. And so
Mm-hmm.
the engagement makes sense because when we were growing up, we
Mm-hmm.
were used, I guess a good saying, of not as much entertained in front of. We could sit there a lot longer doing nothing. We had to
Mm-hmm.
wait through the commercials to get to the show, you know?
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
And so with now modern technology, that attention's maybe not quite there. And so would you say that part of a good teacher or part of a teacher or an excellent classroom would be that engagement part? Um, how do you, because a better question, how do you keep the attention
Yeah.
of kids these days? And how much do you do the show versus
Uh-huh.
the actual work? You know, how do you
Yep.
balance that out? And so diving into a class, what would be some advice that you would have for teachers as far as how to actually run the classroom, as far as the leadership, as far as the management, as far as the engagement? If you were back in the classroom again, I guess we have saying it, what would you be
Mm-hmm.
doing?
So here's a good way to think about this. Now let me clarify something. When you said the show, what exactly did you mean by that?
I had a teacher respond to me, says, I can't keep these kids' attention. I feel like I have to
Mm-hmm.
entertain them.
Got it.
That's the
I
show I'm
thought
referring
that's what
to.
you meant.
Yes.
And that's how a lot of teachers feel, is you have to basically go in some lane. You have to go in some form of entertainment slash consistent novelty to keep the focus of students. She's exactly right, but with an asterisk there.
Okay.
And so it's important to understand what that novelty slash entertainment is. Think of it in these terms. Normally, when we are taught to create a lesson plan, we are taught from a very logical standpoint. You take that learning objective, and depending on what it is that your process or procedure is, you may reverse engineer it, you may break it down by Bloom's. There are a number of different things. But when you get that lesson plan, 9.5 times out of 10, it is very logical, and it requires the students to be deliberate and for them to focus and for them to learn very passively. And when I say passive learning, I mean as in they have to be consumers of the information while the teacher delivers that. Like most lesson plans, and I'm generalizing here, but they have a lot of passive instruction at the foundation and the core. Previous generations, I can remember very clearly that not all of my teachers were the most engaging, and I'm saying this with respect, but we had the tolerance to get through it, if you will. We would zone out, but we did it because of what I mentioned before. We were used to that level of we were not used to that level of constant novelty that students have today. So on the other side of that, if passive instruction is not the goal, then you want to have something that is more active, When I say active instruction, active teaching, I'm talking about something that gets the brain to solve problems, that gets the brain's attention, that gets the brain's focus. What has happened is a lot of teachers have found that out by entertaining. And that is one way, but that's only one way, and it is not the only way. You can also get the brain's attention and get the brain's focus by understanding those five things that I mentioned before. When I talked about meaning, mastery, safety, belonging, and autonomy, the closer that you can infuse your instruction with some of those things, and there are cognitive mechanisms, reward systems, social processing systems, threat detection, the more you get and understand those design elements and you can put them into your instruction, the more attention that you have. Let me give you an example. Okay. One thing that is important to understand is that attention is not free. We, when I'm standing in front of the classroom, my expectation is that my students are paying attention, and I should expect that. And they should pay attention automatically just because I'm standing up there, but they don't. Their brain has to determine that what you are doing is valuable. And what you determine is valuable is determined by how close it meets one of those survival drives, like how close it satisfies one of those things. And so I'll give you an example, like kind of just surface level here and using my own daughter. My daughter is 7. She just turned 7. Well, she's about to turn 7 very soon. And so she's finishing her first grade year. So, first grade, especially towards the beginning of the year, you're working on key mechanics as far as, holding a writing utensil, getting those letters in the right direction, spelling, all these types of things. And you do those things over and over and over to build that muscle, to build that habit. And so, if you think about what I mentioned earlier from the need of mastery, when something is kind of just outside, that almost some people understand it as the zone of proximal development. When something is just outside your zone of capability, there is a push that I can do that. I'm going to put more effort to that. But once you feel, and you may not necessarily have, but once you feel you've mastered it, the effort is not the same. It's now going into that boring pile. So my daughter gets spelling words every single week, about a dozen of them. And one of the assignments to practice those repetitions, to build that muscle memory with repetition is to write those words 4 times each. And so at the beginning of the year, developing that muscle, we would come home, do our homework, and write the words 4 times, 4 times, 4 times. Good. Fix this, yada, yada, yada. She was being challenged. When she felt 6, 8 weeks into the school year that she didn't need to do that anymore, mind you, she definitely still did. But when she felt she didn't, there was resistance because now this is something that is boring. And that's when the huffing and puffing comes in. It is something that she is capable of doing, but her brain does not see it as a worthy challenge. And so now I go into dad mode. You need to get this done. This is like, I start doing all of that and I put on my teacher hat for a second. I said, all right, hold on. I know a lot about how her brain is functioning right now. Let me see if I can do something. And so I went and grabbed there's a box of like accessories and things that we have. And one of the things in there is a set of hourglasses. There's a 1 minute, 3 minute, 5 minute, and 10 minute hourglass. And I think I grabbed like the 3 minute hourglass and I put it right in front of her. And I said, I bet you can do this before the time runs out. Boom. And just like that, it triggered something in her. It made that same exact task a challenge because it triggered something basically called like a temporal cognitive mechanism because it zoned in her focus. Let me put this in a different term. Have you ever been in that situation where you're at the grocery store, maybe when you were younger? I remember being a kid at the grocery store and going to local grocery store with my mom, putting stuff in the cart, and I'm asking for things. She's saying no. We get to the register and it's time to pay for something. And inevitably, she forgot something. She says, wait right here. And she goes to get whatever it is. And all of a sudden, there is this immense pressure that you feel Do you know what I'm
Yeah, no,
saying?
I know you
And
want
it
this. Yeah,
feels like the lady is, swiping stuff
yeah.
faster, and it's like that is that's one of those automatic responses I was talking about. There's a time pressure. Same thing when you're online shopping and you put something in your cart and you go to check out, and that countdown timer
Hmm.
is letting you know, hey, you're going to miss this out. That's an automatic response. You feel pressure. Your threat detection systems are slightly elevated. Like all of those things get you to zone in and focus, even if temporarily, but it's a response that you get. When teachers don't understand, because we're not taught this information of how the brain engages and what it takes to engage and why, you're left guessing, and you're left designing instruction that a lot of times is very, very logical, and it's not wrong, but it's not going to hold the attention like you need it to and get the energy that you need from those students.
Hmm. All right, let me think I got this here now.
Mm-hmm.
So, once again, I'm always framing this and how I what I do in my classroom. You got those five needs we
Yep.
talked about, right? And then now you got the automatic responses
Mm-hmm.
that I'm not sure encourage those needs by basically are reinforcing those needs or those needs.
Making attempts to filter and satisfy the need,
There we
filter
go.
information to satisfy the needs. Correct. Yep.
And so, what would make a classroom better is like you don't swim against the current. You know, these are the biological things, right? You
That's
know, these
it.
are the biological five things. These are biological. And so we're not saying these are solving all the problems. We're just saying, hey, if you know what these are and you know the reaction, the automatic responses, tap into those. By tapping
Correct.
into those, you get more of what you're looking for. And I'm thinking about my own classroom because I always have it. My thing is I have this timer, right? I
Mm-hmm.
have this timer going for almost everything. Like kids come
Mm-hmm.
in, I got the timer going. So I'm tapped without me actually knowing it. I'm tapping into what you just mentioned there, the sense of urgency on it.
Correct.
When at the end of my class, I like let's say we're doing the notes at the end of my class, I'll put up, hey, if you score these points as a grade, you earn. So I'm tapping into that feeling of achievement right then and there in that class. So it gives a lot of clarity to what works and what doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The one thing I always have trouble with, and maybe because I'm too old school, and you mentioned this, is I do a lot of that feeding kids. I guess the word feeding was the word you used, where they do passive learning instead of active learning.
Yeah.
And I
Yep.
find myself moving into that quite a bit. And my fear is, and I think a lot of teachers' fear would be that if we move
Mm-hmm.
more into the active learning, where the kids are more, and I think maybe the definition might be wrong on what I'm thinking here, but if you
Okay.
give kids more autonomy to do the active
Mm-hmm.
learning, it leads many times to more off task, more disruptions, and anything of that sort.
Mm-hmm.
How do we balance those two things out? That's one thing I'm trying to hone in on.
Okay. So let me reframe active learning. When I
Mm,
say active, I don't mean actually physically active. I'm talking about cognitively active.
okay.
And so if I were to, if I'm a math teacher, right?
Hmm.
Maybe this is, I don't know, upper elementary math. And I would normally start a lesson with triangles and right angles on, you know, all right, here is a right angle. It is defined by 90 degrees. Now we are going to go over the formula for a 3, 4, 5 triangle, and you're going to tell me how we can figure and you'd start to present the information that way in a very logical fashion.
Hmm.
And I'm speeding through this for the sake of
Absolutely.
time and brevity, but that is the consummate definition of something that is passive, because you're giving them everything and there's nothing really, they're consuming, but they don't have to make any decisions. If I were to reframe that to make it active, cognitively active, not physically active,
Okay.
I would frame it differently. And I would say something along the lines of, did you know that ancient architects and builders, they were able to build structures, build houses that have a lot of right angles. If you look at this room, you'll see right angle over there, right angle over there. But they they didn't have tools. They didn't have I can't think of the name of that type of right triangle.
Yeah.
But they didn't have one of those. They didn't have, the same types of jackhammers and the measuring tool. They didn't have those things. How do you think that they were able to determine and get that right angle so that building stood up, so those pyramids, how do you think that they were able to do that? Like, I took the same exact concept and I just framed it with curiosity. So now your brain has an automatic reaction. I've opened a loop there and I've introduced something, and this taps into that pattern recognition because I gave you part of it. I didn't give you all of it. But now what I'm basically doing is introducing the concept, but in a totally different way that now I have active processing happening right now and much more likely to grab the student's attention because now I can say they use 3, 4, 5 triangles to get the same exact results that people get today with these professional tools. Let's talk about and let's work this out so that we can build the same and I would go from there. It's the same concept, just approached in a totally different way that gets the brain to now actively engage, not physically again, but cognitively.
All right. Tell me if this fits that what you just described. In my, I teach
Mm-hmm.
history. In my
Mm-hmm.
class, for example, we taught today I was teaching about Nat Turner's rebellion.
Okay.
A slave that rebelled against in slavery ends up, killing everything else. Naturally, but
Mm-hmm.
and so before I jumped into it, I asked the question: is it ever okay to kill? And then as a
Mm.
class, we had this discussion. And yes, no, why, when is okay, not okay. Then we got Nat Turner here. Let's talk about Nat Turner. And so now we're talking about Nat Turner and what he did. Then the end of the question is, was he justified in doing what he did? And is that using that concept then where you're trying to engage the brain to think beyond just here's the information to actually play with
A
it,
thousand percent.
manipulate? Huh.
1,000%. Because in that moment, you posing that seemingly like that question, it's presented surface level, but
Yeah.
it is not.
Yeah.
That there is a lot happening right there because there's relevance
Yeah.
happening. There are open loops happen. Now I have to consider different. I gotta wait, hold on. He's saying something like killing someone, which we most people think is inherently wrong,
Mm-hmm.
but wait, can it be right if I'm
Yeah.
defending my and now we're thinking of have I ever been in a situation like that? Do I know some there's all sorts of active cognitive things happening right there that you could have very well just passively just put that on them for them to be passive consumers of that, but you actively engage them in that. That's a textbook definition of what that means to actively engage with someone. And I'm willing to bet, having not even been there, that you got a lot of participation in that discussion.
Yeah. Now that's my two questions. I have follow-up questions here is one, um, now you got my brain thinking. I'm a chat GPT guy here.
Uh-huh,
Is
uh-huh.
there a have you constructed a list of some sort of here are the five
Mm-hmm.
key things. Here are some I keep out of automatic responses. Is that what your terminology
Mm-hmm.
is?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Here are automatic responses that go with these. Here are
Mm-hmm.
things you can do to trigger those automatic responses. Do you have something like that, or do you know somewhere there's something like that? Not my chat GP it, but I'm thinking, my gosh, if I could tap into going with the stream with connect those things together,
Yeah.
now one I can explain why some of the things I do in my class actually work, but then
Mm-hmm.
I can actually maybe come up with new things I haven't thought about yet. That's the first question. Do you have something?
Mm-hmm.
The second question would be, even in that discussion, I still had kids checked out.
Mm-hmm.
How it are we always going to have kids checked out? Is there a way do we accept the thing, and do we accept the fact that some kids we're just not going to get there, maybe because where they're at in life currently or whatever their interest is,
Mm-hmm.
or is our goal to get every kid? So back to the first question. Let's take care of that first. Do you have something? And the second one is, what do we do with those kids that still, even after our best efforts, still seem to be checked out?
Sure. So to answer your first question, I do, but I don't. I
Okay.
have, it's a part of a framework that I've developed. And the framework is basically, I've kind of labeled it like our behavioral operating system. That's what helps me to understand thinking of those survival drives and the subsequent cognitive mechanisms. And then from those mechanisms, like I said, the 98%, the threat detection, the reward systems, the meaning making, learning of the there's a word like plasticity, excuse me, when you learn something, all of those are part of those, are part of that 98%. But then from that, that elicits specific behaviors. And so to me, that helps me understand human behavior. And so I put that together, and then I use active, what I call kind of cognitive mechanisms that like kind of categorize those active learning principles that I talked about a little bit. And then you couple that with motivational mechanics, and you use that in the learning environment to shape instruction. Like I mentioned before, you use that to shape your routines, and you use that to shape how you relate to students. So it's a framework that I developed. It's called Influence by Design. And I teach that in the workshops that I do with teachers. I'm working on a book, like that's going to be, we talked about books a little while before, but that's going to be in the next one. Right now, we're kind of just in the delivery and iteration phase of it.
All right. So nothing quite just yet, but you do have something.
Yes.
But oh man, I can't wait for this. Okay. And then the second part of the question: how do we those kids that don't quite there? What do we do with those kids?
That's a tough one because we're all driven by the same, we all have the same drives. How we meet those drives differs though. And a
Okay.
lot of times when you see those students that are checked out, when you see those students, like someone could be looking at you right in the face and still not be engaged.
Mm-hmm.
They're meeting that need, they're meeting a need in a different way. And a lot of those things are shaped by past experiences, identity, social context. Like there's a lot of contributing factors that's going to shape what someone does in the moment. Is this like, I'm going to, one of the strong contributing factors is a sense of identity and who I am as it relates to who I want to be in this social context, like my status, my
Mm-hmm.
role, my, and then there's historical factors that shape how you process something in the moment. So there's a lot of complexity when it comes to how someone is going to respond to something. And that's where a lot of the confusion comes from. And in full transparency, I don't even understand it all yet because human beings are extremely complex. Like I'm still researching and learning this, but as I'm talking about this right now, like my brain is firing off like those automatic responses
Mm-hmm.
because of this need to learn. Like you just helped me realize something that I might need to investigate. So when I finish this, I'm going to go back and do some more work. And like that's driving me because I have that, like all of these things, it drives every single thing that we do. And so it's something that I'm still learning to understand because
Mm-hmm.
that student still has those same drives and they still have those same cognitive functions. They just filter and meet them in different ways.
All right. So it still applies, but we come
Hmm.
with the understanding that this kid, they are satisfying his needs by responding the way they're responding. If that is checked out, if that is defiance, if that whatever it is, they're doing it because they're trying to meet certain needs. Um,
Yes.
and so the best we can do is understand those basic needs and hopefully somehow tap into that.
And the
Um,
way and do it the way that you did it before the needs maladaptively express themselves.
mm,
Because what you did was you proactively, whether you realize it or not, you actively gave them something to hook on to from a cognitive standpoint. Had you taught that same lesson in a passive way, you increase the chances of students tapping out due to boredom and then doing something off task.
that okay. That's as we're talking, things are popping in my head. Things are firing.
Hmm.
I have this, I get this question, or I think about this a lot as well. And this was going to be one of the questions I'm going to ask you. But now, as
Hmm.
we're talking, I'm thinking. Well, let me ask this question. Here's the question.
Okay.
All right. So So let's say, practically speaking, one of the big issues that many new teachers have is they'll be in the classroom and the class is disrupted. They're trying to do their lesson,
Mhm.
but they can't even get through the lesson because there's so many disruptions. Kids are talking, not paying attention, and everything else that goes along with it. And so when I go observe these classrooms, I want to solve their problem for them by telling them, you should, implement these things, whatever else it is. I give them the ABC checklist,
Mhm.
right, to do it. But the question is, what advice would you give to a teacher like that has a hard time, back to the classroom manager, has a hard time
Yeah.
just carrying out a lesson because the students are so disruptive? How
Okay.
would you tap into those things you're talking about to make a change in that classroom?
Having had a lot of experience with this same exact thing, most times when that happens, it doesn't start that way. It snowballs into that.
Mm, that's what I was thinking. Go ahead.
And and when especially if I can get in there at the beginning of the classroom, at the beginning of the class or the lesson, I see it happening in real time because the way that the lesson is being delivered, and this is no fault, this is no
Mm,
slight to the teacher because I wholeheartedly believe that teacher is doing the best that they can in
mhm,
that moment. But if that information is being delivered in a way that is not actively cognitively engaging those students, it's opening the playing field for them to cognitively engage with something else. And that might be talking to my neighbor, that might be getting up and walking around. It could be a number of things to go back to those same 5 drives. But if I start the class the way you did and got me thinking actively, like there's no need for me to now meet those needs in another way because I'm more, my attention and my energy, attention is not free, attention is a form of energy, is already being directed in that moment. Most of the time, it did not start that way. It escalates into something like that. And so the more that I can help a teacher to understand from a design standpoint, when you're designing that learning experience and when you are creating that opportunity for your students to engage, make sure that they have something to engage with. And it's not with that passive form of instruction that so many of us have been taught to use.
mm. So, oh man, this is good. All right. So tell me if I'm on point on this one.
Hmm.
We talk about classroom and classroom leadership, classroom management. You mentioned like routines and stuff of that
Hmm.
sort. Would it
Yes.
be fair to say that the goal of classroom management is to develop those routines, those patterns, those predictable things in a classroom so that it creates the stage to take it to the next level where you can actually engage students? Thinking about what you mentioned, the word you got me was snowball. That was it,
Hmm.
snowball. And I think to myself, so much of the behavior in the classroom, the reason we get to that point is because it snowballs to something smaller, just escalating, or we let something go. That I call the broken window thing. You let the broken window go, next thing you know, you got huger problems. So if we're
Hmm.
able to get it from the very beginning by using effective classroom management strategies, routines, patterns, this and everything else, that we
Hmm.
can get it before it even snowballs into something greater. And then we layer on top of that everything you've mentioned. Would that be an effective
Hmm.
classroom, you think, or am I off point on a little bit on this, or where would you want to clarify that?
I'm right with you there. It would. It sets the grounds for it, but it's not all that you need. And when you
Yes.
said layering on top,
Hmm.
that's yes. You it's dynamic in that the instruction, although they're treated separately, engagement and behavior management, I do believe engagement is a form of behavior management.
Mm,
Because if I'm engaged in something, then I'm less likely to disrupt. I'm not going to disrupt something that I'm enjoying.
yes.
It makes no sense. If I'm getting something out of this, I'm locked in.
How do we get? Gosh, here's the question, man. I agree with you. I'm thinking. I don't know if this is a good trait or bad trait. When I hear people talk, I think to the myself, what can I learn from it, and what
Hmm.
do I disagree with it? because I want to
Hmm.
push my own thought process. And I'm not, it's making so much sense. It really does. My question is, how do you get brand new teachers
Yeah.
to that? Because I always share this and it blows my mind. I remember I shared this when I was first started teaching. They said within the first 5 years, about half the teachers quit after the first 5 years before they get to the five
Yeah.
year. I'm thinking, how do you, and that's kind of one of my goals of this channel and everything else. How do you stop that from happening? How do you get teachers to the point where they have the management or they have the leadership? They have, is there a way to shorten that learning curve for teachers? I guess a
Hmm.
good way of saying it. So they don't get to that point where they burn out and give up before they find the thing they're looking for.
That's what I'm working on right now.
Isn't
Literally.
it? Yeah.
That is the
Oh.
magic question, and that is what I believe is when we learn to become teachers, we're learning in the traditional logical sense, but logic does not
Mm.
have the impact that we want it to. And we keep trying to make logic work in the classroom, but we are emotional, instinctive
Mm.
beings. We respond with emotion and instinct well before logic. That's just we've never worked that way.
Yeah. Oh man, this is a lifelong quest. I'm telling you, this has been my passion for the past 5 years is trying to figure it out. And it just it's so different. I have a whole list of questions. I mean, I haven't even got to my list of questions. This is great. I mean, tell me a little more about it. So all right, so we got your lore, we got your story. Now
Uh,
you're not in the classroom currently, but
Correct.
you were doing that for 15 years.
15 years. Yes, sir.
50 teacher of the year, I believe, right? Once,
Yes.
twice, how many times?
I got teacher of the year once. Yes.
Teacher 1 year once. Then from there, you decided to step out of the classroom and focus on helping teachers become, I guess,
Hmm.
better. So, what exactly are you doing now then, as far as you speak, you
Hmm.
workshops? What is your focus right now then?
So my focus right now is essentially the closing that gap between how we are trained to teach and what we actually need to be effective in a learning environment. I've worked tirelessly for the past, I don't even know how many years to kind of similar to your story. There were things that I did that worked, but I did not have the language to understand why. And there were things that I did that did not work that I was told would work, and I did not understand why. And so I have been trying to. I've gotten really good at asking better questions. Oh, as I've grown from a research standpoint, as I've grown from a practitioner standpoint, I've learned that I have to, and in education, we've always been asking the wrong and same questions. I started asking different questions, and that led me to different areas of research, and I got different answers. And now I'm formulating, as I mentioned, influenced by design, leveraging survival instincts and cognitive mechanisms and predictable behavior patterns to shape instruction, relationships, and procedures in the learning environment. And like everything has changed because it's rooted in proven, time-tested principles of what drives us to do everything every day.
Wow. And so this book is you're working on.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to it now. I really, I mean, I'm like, this got me going. This is half the stuff we're talking about here. Oh, wow. All right. We're gonna land this plane, as they might say here. But
Uh-huh.
here's another question. So you spoke to numerous. I mean, I looked at your thing, man. You've been everywhere, talking to everybody, districts, you name it, coaching,
Yes, sir.
mentoring, programs, a book, and all that. What is the number one thing that teachers will come to you or a district will come to you saying, "Hey, can you solve this problem for us?" Or what do I do here? What is that one thing that seems to cover 90% of the problems teachers have?
Behavior management.
Behavior management.
Straight up and down.
That's it.
Behavior management, and all of the sub aspects of behavior management. As I mentioned before, and we've talked about the routines,
Mm.
the engagement factor, all of there's a lot of nuance in
Mhm.
what it means to manage a classroom and what it means to de-escalate a problem and what it means to understand how to relate. Like there are so, if you think about it, when you're a teacher, and it makes sense when I say this out loud logically, but we work with other human beings. Do you see what I'm saying?
No,
Like we
I
work
got you.
with
Yes,
other
yes,
human beings and we're not taught how those human beings work.
yes.
And they're not simple beings by any stretch of the imagination, but we're taught to teach them in very simple and practical ways. And it has not worked and it will not work.
Mm,
So I'm trying my best to get the message out that with behavior management, and granted, this is, I'm generalizing here, I know, because
absolutely.
there are extenuating circumstances in every, you have
Yes.
your varied situations, but I try to help the teachers that I work with, whether it is a keynote workshop, consulting project, whatever it may be. Yes, that child may be dealing with who knows what at home. Yes, they might be. They might have had this adverse experience, but they're in your presence now. And statistically speaking, you have more influence than all of those things.
Mm,
And I see it all the time. There's children that are, I mean, some of the trauma,
mhm.
they deal with more than you and I combined.
Yeah.
And they will come to school, and if they feel that they belong there, if they feel that their drive to learn, if they feel that they have a sense of understanding their purpose and identity, like all of those things that trace back to meeting, that get those cognitive mechanisms firing and meet those survival drives, you will see someone who can do the impossible, literally.
Man, you got me pumped up. I just got done with all my class today. I feel like I want to go teaching it now. That never
Let's go.
happens at the end of the day. Oh wow. Oh, Dr. Will, hey, I'm gonna thank you for taking the time to talk to me. Let's throw some stuff out there. If someone wants to get a hold of you one way
Uh-huh.
or the other, what are some of your handles? Where they go to look for you?
Sure. My website is teachhustleinspire.com. And you can also find me on all forms of social media. It's either at Teach Hustle Inspire or just my first and last name, Shaun Woodley on Twitter, and also LinkedIn.
Ah, well, hey, it's been a pleasure. It really has been a pleasure talking to you. You got me thinking in ways I haven't thought in for 20 years now, you know? So
Same here.
I appreciate it. Hey, thank you so much. And I'll put all your information in the details down below. So if anybody wants to hold of you, they can get a hold of you.
Much appreciated. Thank you again. Glad to be here.